For almost 1,000 years, the Earth had known peace. No great wars, no weapons fired in anger, no nations plotting against one another. Instead, humanity had chosen another path, one that was not easy at first, but had slowly, year after year, century after century, grown stronger. It had begun with small steps, people realizing that endless fighting only brought sorrow, that every war left behind broken families and empty homes. Humanity had finally asked itself a simple question. How many times could it destroy itself before there was nothing left to rebuild? The answer was clear, and so began the long road to peace. Children grew up in a world where the word battle belonged only in history books, and even then, the pages felt more like cautionary tales than real memories. The stories of tanks, bombs, and guns became bedtime stories, told almost like old myths, warnings from a distant past. The young could not imagine a world where neighbors feared one another, where skies filled with smoke, or where soldiers marched across lands. Instead, they saw a world where rivers were clean, skies were clear, and laughter echoed in places that once knew only silence. Over time, technology had advanced beyond what anyone once thought possible. Machines worked side by side with people, not to replace them, but to give them more time to live. Energy no longer came from burning or destroying, but from the quiet strength of the sun, the steady pull of the tides, and the endless winds. Food was plentiful, medicine was gentle and strong, and life stretched longer than ever before. Yet even in this abundance, humanity did not forget the lessons of the past. They remembered that greed had once almost destroyed them, and so they taught each generation that peace was not something to be taken for granted. It was something to be protected, not with weapons, but with understanding, patience, and kindness. For centuries, Earth became a symbol in the galaxy, though most humans did not even realize how closely they were being watched. From faraway stars, other civilizations saw this. Quiet planet that had once been noisy with wars, now living in harmony. Many admired it, some doubted it, and a few even mocked it. They thought peace for so long would make humanity soft, fragile, unable to defend itself if danger came again. But the humans never worried. They smiled at such thoughts, because they knew peace was not weakness. Peace was strength, the kind of strength that came from learning to rise again after falling too many times. In this new world, people no longer hurried through their days in fear. They had time to walk slowly under the trees, to listen to the sea, to share stories with their children, and to look up at the stars without dread of what might come from them. Art blossomed, music filled the air, and every culture was celebrated. No language was forgotten, no tradition left behind. Humanity had become like a great woven fabric, each thread different but all connected, and together they created something beautiful. Still, even in this calm, there was always a small whisper of doubt, not among humans, but among those who watched them from the stars. Could such a species, once so fiery and divided, truly remain peaceful forever? Some alien minds wondered if this peace was real or only a mask hiding weakness. They asked themselves, if humanity were tested again, would they crumble? Would they beg for mercy? Or had they truly changed? The answer, of course, could only come with time. And so the centuries passed, each one as quiet and bright as the last. Whole generations lived and died, never knowing fear, never hearing the cry of battle, never seeing the shadow of destruction. To them, life was about creating, sharing, and learning. Parents raised their children not with warnings of war, but with encouragement to dream and to build. Schools taught not only science and history, but kindness and patience. The stars above, once seen as cold and unreachable, became familiar friends, as ships carried explorers beyond Earth and into the wider galaxy. Humanity met other worlds, other beings, and they reached out not with weapons, but with open hands and hopeful voices. Some civilizations welcomed this with joy, glad to see a species so ready for peace. Others remained distant, suspicious of this unusual calm. But humanity did not force anyone to accept them. They simply continued to walk their path, believing that example was more powerful than demand. And indeed, in many places, other worlds began to wonder if perhaps peace was possible for them too. But not everyone believed. In the depths of space, there were those who looked at Earth and saw not wisdom, but vulnerability. They whispered among themselves that humans had forgotten how to be strong, that their long peace had turned them into dreamers with no claws. These voices grew louder with time, until one day their doubts took shape. A great fleet began to move, gathering power and courage, convinced that the age of human peace could be broken with force. Yet back on Earth, life went on in the same gentle rhythm. No one expected war, no one even spoke of it. When the fleet was first spotted at the edge of human space, there was no panic, no chaos. Instead, there was a strange calm, as if the planet itself had been waiting for this moment. Humanity had not prepared weapons in secret, nor built great armies in the shadows. But they had prepared in another way. They had prepared their hearts, their minds, and their unity. For 1,000 years, they had lived as one people, and they knew that if the storm came, they would face it together. As the alien fleet drew closer, their leaders believed victory would be swift. They imagined humans scattering in fear, begging for mercy. But instead, what they saw from Earth was something unexpected: silence, and then a faint smile. It was not the smile of arrogance, nor the smile of mockery. It was the quiet, knowing smile of a people who had endured much, learned much, and would not be broken again. The first part of this story belongs to the peace, the long, gentle peace that shaped humanity into something new. It is the foundation upon which the future would be tested. And as the alien fleet prepared to challenge this calm, they did not yet understand why the humans smiled, nor what strength truly lay behind that 1,000 years of silence. That answer was still to come. But for now, the world remained still, holding its breath, waiting for what the stars would bring. The night sky had always been a source of wonder for people. For as long as anyone could remember, they had looked upward at the stars, tracing patterns, telling stories, and finding comfort in the lights that shimmered far beyond reach. But one evening, as the village settled into the quiet of twilight, something unusual appeared. The stars seemed brighter, sharper, as if they were leaning closer, whispering secrets to those who would listen. Among the villagers, there was a sense of curiosity but also of unease. The stars had always been distant, eternal companions, and now they felt different, alive, almost watchful. Children pointed upward and asked questions, their voices filled with excitement, while the elders fell silent, remembering ancient tales of challenges that came from the heavens. The people gathered in the square, their torches glowing softly in the cool air. It was not fear that filled their hearts, but a strange anticipation. They had lived their lives guided by the seasons, the rivers, and the soil beneath their feet. But now, the challenge seemed to come from the vast sky above, as though the stars themselves had chosen this moment to speak. As night deepened, a streak of light crossed the heavens. It was not like a shooting star that vanished in a blink, but a steady glow that lingered. The people watched in silence. Some believed it was a sign of blessing, others thought it was a test. What none of them knew was how deeply this moment would shape the days to come. The glow grew brighter over the next nights, almost as if a new star had been born. The villagers began to dream vividly, visions of journeys, trials, and voices calling out from beyond. These dreams were not frightening. They were guiding, gentle, yet filled with purpose. In their sleep, they saw bridges of light, endless, oceans of stars, and paths that led beyond the world they knew. Each morning, people awoke with a strange unity. Farmers, shepherds, and craftsmen all spoke of the same dreams. Though they lived different lives, the visions had touched them equally. It was as if the stars were calling not just one person, but the entire village to rise to a challenge they could not yet see. One day, the glow from the sky seemed to pulse in rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. The villagers stood together at the edge of the fields, watching the heavens breathe with light. It was then that they understood. The challenge was not to fight or conquer, but to discover, to listen, and to grow. The elders reminded them of an old story, passed down for generations, about a time when the earth and the sky spoke to one another. The story told of people who dared to dream beyond what was known, who welcomed the challenge from the stars not with fear, but with courage and kindness. And though no one knew if the story was true, it gave the villagers strength. They began to prepare in their own way. The farmers planted seeds with extra care, believing that the harvest would be needed for a journey ahead. The craftspeople polished tools and carved symbols of the stars onto wood and stone, reminders of the guiding light above. The children practiced songs they had learned in their dreams, gentle melodies that made the heart feel steady and calm. Every evening, as the glow returned to the sky, the people would gather and watch together. They did not see it as a warning anymore. Instead, they saw it as an invitation, an opportunity to reach higher, to imagine more, and to step beyond the small fears of daily life. The challenge was not only from the stars, but also within themselves. Could they stay united? Could they listen to one another with patience and care? Could they choose hope over doubt? These were the real questions, and slowly the people began to answer them with their actions. Neighbors who once argued over land began to share meals. Strangers were welcomed with warmth, for every new face carried a voice that might add to the growing harmony. Even the quiet ones, who often stayed on the edge of the crowd, were invited to speak, for the stars seemed to remind everyone that every voice mattered. One night, the glow in the sky split into many streams of light, like rivers pouring down from the heavens. The villagers gasped, but then grew calm, realizing the streams were guiding them toward something new. In their dreams that night, they saw a journey beyond the mountains, across rivers, into valleys they had never explored. It was not just a physical journey, but a journey of the heart. And so, they made a decision. Together, they would follow the path shown to them. Not because they feared what would happen if they stayed behind, but because they felt a pull to grow, to learn, and to see what lay beyond the horizon. As they prepared, the mood of the village changed. Where once there had been worry and uncertainty, now there was hope. People worked side by side, singing softly, telling stories to children, and building trust that felt stronger than stone. The challenge from the stars had not come to frighten them. It had come to remind them of what they could be when they believed in one another. The glow in the heavens was like a mirror, showing them their own light reflected back. As the time came to begin their journey, the villagers stood at the edge of the fields once more, looking at the familiar land that had carried them for generations. They felt gratitude, not sadness, for they knew they would carry these memories wherever they went. The stars pulsed again, softer now, as if satisfied with the choice the people had made. The journey would not be easy, but it would be filled with meaning. And as the first steps were taken toward the unknown, the people walked not in silence but in harmony, each footstep a gentle promise to the earth and to the sky above. The challenge from the stars was not about battles or fear. It was about awakening. It was about remembering that even the smallest village could be part of something vast and beautiful. It was about learning that strength is not found in walls or weapons, but in kindness, unity, and the courage to dream. And as they walked beneath the endless sky, the villagers understood that they were no longer just watching the stars. They were walking toward them, one step at a time, guided by light, guided by hope, and guided by the quiet belief that they, too, were part of the story written in the heavens. The night air was calm, the stars steady, and the path clear. The challenge had begun, not with fear, but with the gentle power of human hearts ready to rise. And with that, the people moved forward, carrying the whispers of the stars in their souls, stepping softly into the next chapter of their story. The morning was gentle, with a soft golden light spreading slowly across the land. The people had walked for many days, following the quiet call of the stars, and now they found themselves at the edge of a valley so wide and beautiful that it seemed to have no end. Green fields stretched far into the horizon, rivers shimmered like silver threads, and the wind carried the fragrance of blossoms from unseen gardens. For a long moment, everyone simply stood in silence, breathing in the calm, their tired bodies eased by the beauty before them. It was in that moment that the first smiles began to appear. At first, they were small, almost shy, as if the people had forgotten how it felt to smile so freely. But then the smiles grew, spreading from one face to another like fire, catching on dry wood, not burning, but warming. The children laughed and ran ahead, their voices rising in cheerful echoes across the valley. The elders, who had seen many seasons, looked at each other with eyes that sparkled with gratitude. Why did they smile? It was not because their journey was over, for they knew many steps still lay ahead. They smiled because, for the first time in a long time, they felt whole. They had faced challenges. They had walked through uncertainty. But in the end, they had discovered something deep and simple. They were stronger when they stood together, and life was brighter when they shared it with kindness. As they settled into the valley, the people began to rebuild, not just their homes, but their sense of belonging. They crafted shelters from wood and stone, shaping them with care, while songs filled the air. Work did not feel heavy because it was shared, and laughter often broke the silence between tasks. Each day was filled with purpose, not because of fear or duty, but because they wanted to build something lasting, something that reflected the lessons they had learned under the guidance of the stars. One evening, as the sun set in a gentle blaze of orange and gold, the people gathered together in a wide circle. They lit a fire in the center, not for warmth, but for light, for the joy of seeing each other's faces glow in its flickering dance. Stories began to flow, soft voices telling of the journey, of the signs in the sky, of the strength they had found in unity. Children listened with wide eyes, holding on to every word, as if they already understood that these stories would become treasures to carry forward. It was during one of these evenings that an elder stood and spoke slowly. "The stars showed us the path," the elder said, "but it was our hearts that carried us here. The challenge was not about reaching the valley or crossing the rivers. It was about remembering who we are when we walk side by side. That is why we smile, because we have seen what we can be." The crowd grew quiet, reflecting on those words. Then, as if carried by the same thought, smiles spread once more, soft and genuine. Some shed gentle tears, not of sadness, but of relief. It was as though the burdens of the past had melted away, leaving behind something pure, like clear water flowing freely from a spring. Life in the valley began to shape itself into a rhythm. The farmers tilled the soil with patience, planting seeds that would soon grow into fields of grain. The children learned to weave baskets, to paint simple designs on walls, to sing songs that blended with the rustling of the trees. At night they would look at the stars again, not with fear, but with gratitude. The stars were no longer distant watchers. They were reminders of the journey, silent companions in the sky. One night, when the moon hung full and bright, the people organized a gathering. There was no reason other than to celebrate being alive. They shared food, danced in circles, and sang until their voices grew soft with sleep. It was then that they realized why humanity smiled. They smiled because they had discovered joy not in riches or power, but in connection, in the warmth of being part of something greater than themselves. Even the smallest gestures became reasons to smile. A child offering a flower to an elder, a farmer sharing fresh bread with neighbors, a young hand reaching out to help an older one climb a hill. These moments, small and ordinary, were in truth extraordinary. They were the threads that wove the people together, and the smiles that followed were their proof. In time, visitors arrived from distant lands. They had seen the glow in the sky. They had heard whispers of the journey, and they came with curiosity. Instead of guarding themselves with suspicion, the villagers opened their arms with kindness. They welcomed strangers as friends, offering them seats by the fire, food at the table, and stories to share. And soon, the smiles grew wider, spreading from the valley to places far beyond. The challenge from the stars had taught them a truth that could not be forgotten. Humanity is not meant to walk alone. The real strength of people is not in what they can hold, but in what they can give. And when they give kindness, hope, and love, the world changes. The valley itself seemed to grow more beautiful with each passing day, as though it too was smiling. In return, seasons shifted, and with each change, the people found new reasons to smile. In spring, it was the blossoms filling the air with fragrance. In summer, it was the laughter of children playing by the riverside. In autumn, it was the harvest shared in abundance, tables full of bread and fruit. In winter, it was the warmth of fires and the closeness of families telling stories to keep the cold away. The smiles were no longer rare or fleeting. They became part of daily life, as natural as the sunrise. Smiles carried them through challenges, reminding them of the strength they had already proven. Smiles healed old wounds, mended old disagreements, and opened the door to new friendships. And when the stars shone above, the people smiled back, remembering how it had all begun. Why humanity smiled was not a mystery anymore. It was not because their journey had ended, but because they had found something eternal within themselves. They smiled because they had learned that kindness is stronger than fear, that unity is brighter than doubt, and that hope is more powerful than any challenge. They smiled because they knew deep in their hearts that they were part of a story much larger than themselves. A story written not only in the stars, but in every act of compassion, every hand held, every moment of shared peace. And so, the people continued to live, guided by light, by love, and by the simple truth that a smile can change everything. Each night, before closing their eyes, they carried that truth with them into dreams, letting it shine gently in their hearts. The valley grew, the community thrived, and the stars watched from above. Humanity smiled, not because life was without hardship, but because even in hardship, they had discovered meaning. Smiles had become their gift to one another, and their gift to the world. And that gift, simple yet eternal, was what made them strong, what made them human, and what made their journey worth every step.